very, very first thing, absolutely first thing that any organization needs to do is education. So this is it's a whole new world, right? You don't know what you don't know. And I think there's perhaps, whilst generative AI and particularly things like ChatGPT are really easy to interface with, there might be a bit of a misperception there in that it is a very easy thing and we just can implement it.
The AI Grapple, where the future begins.
Welcome to another episode of the AI Grapple. My name is Kate vanderVoort, founder of Social Mediology. Today we have an exciting guest, Lee Schofield, the co-founder of Future for Now. Lee is dedicated to upskilling organisations and individuals on AI literacy and assisting leaders with their AI strategies. With a diverse background in economics, finance, and human-centred design, Lee brings a unique perspective on how AI intersects with social sciences and technology. In our conversation, we discuss the importance of AI education, the future of work, and the critical role of ethics and responsibility in AI implementation. It's a great discussion that offers loads of practical tips and thoughtful perspectives.
Well, thanks, Kate, for having me on. Very excited to be here.
Why don't we start a little bit? I'm always interested to hear how people came to working in AI. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you've landed where you are?
Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose it's a different path than most AI people. My background is I studied economics and finance back in the day, and worked a big chunk of my career in finance at the start, in corporate valuations and mergers and acquisitions, and kind of realized, though, that it wasn't really the area that I wanted to be focused on, and started to lean more into sort of social sciences and also into market research, insights analytics. But then I really found my way when I started to work more in design thinking and human-centered design. And when I started to play with ChatGPT back in November 2022, I realized that it felt very much more like a social. It wasn't just tech; it's social science and tech. It was like it really changed how I was working immediately. I was also working in a startup at the time, and I was designing an app, and I was like, wow, this is going to change actually how we perhaps build the app, but also what the features are, all of that sort of stuff. And I realized that my workflows were changing immediately. I was like, okay, so this is going to change the future of work and how we work. And also I started to dive really, like, the curiosity got me, and I read all of these books. I read so many books in the course of the following months around AI and understanding it, and started to understand how it wasn't, it's not just data science, but how much we need to think about the design of it and the bias, the ethics, all of the stuff in it. So fast forward a little bit, I ended up launching Future for Now, and we are focused on AI literacy. And we most recently have launched a series of workshops that are dedicated to helping upskill women, professional women with non-tech backgrounds, because what we're finding with generative AI is that the best part about it is that it's so accessible and that anyone can use it, but that you need to know how to use it properly in order to get the best outputs for it. So our workshops are really designed around helping that. And so, that's sort of how I ended up in it. And we've been training organizations for the last year as well, and doing everything from conferences where we, run big sessions through to these playground sessions where we are training teams on very specific use cases with generative AI. So that's a little bit of a summary of how I got here. It's a little bit of a different way of probably getting into AI, but I'm very passionate about education and training, and also just design. So it's been a really, interesting path for me.
It's amazing how many people I interviewed where human-centered design has actually been the pathway into it. And I think AI is suddenly I've been talking for 15 years about hyper-personalization and how we use data to really connect with humans. And it's almost like AI is seeing the realization of some of the ways we've been working for so long, but in ways that we would never necessarily have imagined it. So
Absolutely, yeah.
great, you've got that real human focus on what you're doing. So Lee, when you think about, I mean, we're undergoing this enormous transition at the moment where I often liken it to, you know, we're standing on the edge of a river. It's a raging river and so much is happening and so much change is happening. And often people don't know how to dip their toe in the water and they're scared of being kind of, you know, washed away in that torrent. When you think about professionals and the people that you're working with, what kind of skills do you suggest they develop, or what kind of skills are you finding people maybe already have that help them to stay relevant in that evolving or that rapid raging river to stay afloat?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because I feel like I'm not alone in this that it's a lot of soft skills are going to be really important in the future. And I think we had Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, basically saying the future of coding is just, you know, human language, English, whatever language that you speak, as opposed to a coding language. And I think that's really interesting. You go, okay, well, for the last, for a big chunk of, you know, the last 30 years or so has been very STEM focused, and STEM's obviously still super important, but that soft skills are going to become more important in this generation of work. And I think obviously, you know, AI literacy is really key. So kind of like the digital revolution, learning how to use a computer, learning how to, you know, use the internet, all of that was really important for our work. Now in this revolution will be how we use AI, how we talk to AI, and, you know, understanding which tools to use for which at which point, because there's so many tools. What are they, like I feel like there would be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tools now, maybe if not millions, probably more millions of AI tools that have been built on top of these generative models now. So navigating that and knowing which ones are good is also going to be a big part of it. But coming back to that soft skill part, I see that critical thinking and creativity being really, really key in how you think about how you use the tool. I certainly think that having a sort of a strategic and curious mindset is often very good with this, with using the tools, and also just systems thinking, right? So being able to go, well, what if this, then what else is true? And you sort of connecting the dots between things. And I'm not sure our education system at this stage is really equipped for that, right? And it's not really, hasn't been teaching systems thinking, you know, in very, very well. And I think that the other part of it would be communication. So I think that people with a communications degree right now might be very useful in this era, because being able to brief the AI, it's kind of like being able to brief a human, right? So, you know, we know how bad, you know, it's sort of garbage in, garbage out, right? If you put forward a bad brief, you're probably not going to get the best outputs from the human that you're working with. Similarly with AI, if you can't articulate what you want out of the outputs and have a good idea of what the sort of, you know, what your goals are, then you're probably not going to get a very good response back. I would also say that, you know, obviously there's a big human element here where you need to be good with empathetic, being able to talk to other humans, all of that sort of stuff. So those kind of soft skills there. And finally, I would say adaptability being really key. I think that LinkedIn's number one skill for, you know, what was being listed on job roles and all of that was adaptability. So I think that being able to go, okay, I can change, I can adapt, you know, resilience, all of that sort of stuff is going to be so key, because this technology is changing so quickly. And I'm sure that you have experienced the same thing, where it feels a little bit like some of the stuff that you might learn last week or might learn a month ago is outdated within that month, basically. So adaptability and having that mindset, those keys things is going to be so key for being able to, I guess, approach this revolution, and being able to have our learning and growth mindset, right? Being like, okay, we are now in an era where I don't think we have any other way of going other than being constant learners. I think if you go, okay, I am just going to have a fixed mindset, okay, this is AI and this is how it works, you're going to fall behind pretty quickly, because it is going to change next month, it'll change the month after that, and we will have more and more tools at our disposal there.
Yeah, and I think there's so much in what you just said then. But
Sorry, there's a lot.
I think there's a lot, and I think there's still not even a common understanding of what AI is, and
Mm,
certainly not a common understanding of what it means for us during this time. And a couple of the points you made just then that I really love, I think those soft skills. I mean, I've been saying to clients that we're going to, the next few years are going to be bumpy. There's going to be a lot of issues that we grapple with as society, as humanity, as employers, as employees. That this isn't going to be a smooth ride. And some of those softer skills around empathy and collaboration and working together and having that culture of curiosity, I talk about it, really creating that space where people can have a go and fail. I'm not a huge fan of that word, but have a go and not be fearful of the consequences if they fail. And I think one of the other things that you touched on that you must see a lot in your work, especially working with female leaders, this fear about job loss, or is it going to take away from me? I think women, but anyone of a more mature age, have got an amazing opportunity to add AI to their skill set, and they bring with them a wisdom and an experience that some of our younger employees don't necessarily have. And I think that certainly for the next 5 to 10 years, that combination of wisdom and experience powered by AI it really puts a lot of those, women in leadership in particular into a really valuable place for them.
absolutely. I think that because they're able to, they've got a whole library in their head of different things and different instances that they've sort of acquired over the years, that changes how you communicate with an AI, right? Because you have this broader perspective. And I think that even like on a level of going, there's a lot of obviously these tools and concerns around, say, if you're doing something with graphic design and there's all these tools that are coming out, and it's quite scary in that it is good at producing those images. But the thing is that, and I've seen this in practice, is that what I can get out as someone that's not a graphic designer, doesn't have that vocabulary in my head, out of a image generator, compared to someone that has years and years of experience and understands and can actually articulate very specific design terms, they're going to get a lot better outputs out of it. So I do think that, there's still a skill in that. And it's not just like going to, disappear, right? Being able to have that wealth of knowledge. And, I come at this from strategy and design, and I have design thinking. I have the ability to articulate things in certain ways that perhaps other people can't, that don't have those skills. But similarly, yeah, that happens with everything. And I think that knowing that your knowledge is not wasted just because there's this new AI model that's come out. It certainly isn't that, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I agree. So when you're working with organizations, and particularly around leadership or, organizational leaders who are looking at implementing or integrating AI into their business or their organization, what best practices and pitfalls do you talk about in your work? How do you help people navigate that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I always say that the very, very first thing, absolutely first thing that any organization needs to do is education. So this is it's a whole new world, right? You don't know what you don't know. And I think there's perhaps, whilst generative AI and particularly things like ChatGPT are really easy to interface with, there might be a bit of a misperception there in that it is a very easy thing and we just can implement it. But actually, it's so much deeper, as you would know, having done a lot of research in it, that there's a lot behind it. And there are so many things that you need to understand around bias, hallucinations, the training data, the privacy and security around your data. And if you miss that step of educating and bringing perhaps your whole team on that journey with you, you're going to miss a trick, I think, because also all of your workers and employees have so much knowledge in their head that is very specific, and the use cases are going to change from, one person to the next. And if you are trying to create a sort of, I guess, umbrella of how the company is going to approach it immediately without having educated and understood how the technology works, you're probably going to make some pretty big mistakes. So education is really key. And we have our foundations training where we go, okay, well, what is AI first? And then what is generative AI? What are some of the limitations? What are the opportunities? And then we also have our playground sessions where we get people on the tools, because that is, play is super important, and experimentation. So if you start with the education, I feel like it gives that really great wide perspective of everything that's happening, also the trends that are coming down the line, because, and we'll talk a little bit later about this, I think, in the podcast, but how basically it's going to impact, the economy broadly. But once you've got that education, I think that then to the point I was just making, that play and experimentation is the next part. So getting your people in your workplace to start to play and experiment with technologies in a safe way. And by safe, I mean, don't put any data in that's going to be, you just got to start to understand, it's like opening up your laptop or, your computer for the very first time. It's like you just got to kind of play with it a little bit to get a feel for how it works. And if you don't do that part, then you sort of, again, you're going to not understand how the technology works at a fundamental level. So these playground sessions we really find are useful in expanding that and seeing that, going, okay, if I talk to and prompt a tool in this way, and it's very simple, and then I add a little bit extra detail, the outputs are so dramatically different. And even just that, that experiment for people and seeing how things change, it starts to bring up that systems thinking, that critical thinking of how you might use the tool in order to get better outputs. The next thing I would say, and I often say to organizations, is that small steps are really key. So as opposed to, there's these big sort of ideas of like, oh, okay, transformation, let's transform the whole company. I remember this Atlassian, I've forgotten what his name is, Dominic Price, I think. He talks about evolution over transformation. So it's like evolving with the tech, right? And taking those small steps, those prototypes, those like pilot ones where you go, okay, let's test this particular part of our business using generative AI. And perhaps maybe you want to do like an A/B test where you've got two teams doing the same project, and one where they're using AI and one where they're just using the old method and using whatever that was. And then at the end, reflecting and understanding where the differences were, what the outputs were, comparing those outputs, and see if it's worth implementing. So choosing a pilot project that is going to be safe. Obviously, always make sure that your data is not being, know that there are a lot of models out there that are training future models on anything that you put in them. I know that OpenAI has recently come out and said, though, that they've got better privacy around this now and that you can switch off your training data, but that doesn't apply to all tools. So I think that it's just being really, really aware of that. So yes, small steps.
I've found with OpenAI too, sorry to interrupt you, but with OpenAI too and ChatGPT, that option to switch it on and off has come and gone over time. And so I know at least 3 times I have switched off the do not use my data and training data. Yes. And then I've gone to show other people how to do that and the option's not even there anymore. Yeah. And then it comes back again. So
I have noticed that too.
Because I know they do say also with ChatGPT teams that your data is ring fenced. So that's one way for businesses to if they've use a platform like ChatGPT from an enterprise perspective, so their data is more protected.
Yeah, I think that's really important though to note that that's only if you have that enterprise model, right?
Yes.
So if you're using Copilot just on Bing as an individual, it is still likely to be training future models.
Yes.
So there's those differences between having an enterprise model versus, or like having a business license of these models versus and this is again super important, right, for why you need to roll out the education now, why you need to start to choose tools, is because otherwise your employees might, and actually you'll probably have a really good perspective on this, that your employees might start to use the tools in a way that's a bit that could be a bit rogue, much like what happened at the start of social media, right? So it's like it was bottom up, and there was a lot of the juniors going, "Oh, this is how you use the tool," and and getting excited, and then doing doing things like, I feel like I remember reading something about the launch of a product, and they took a photo and it wasn't even launched on market yet, but it went on social media, and they sort of not having those policies in place. So I think that's the fourth thing, is like policy and tooling, and going, okay, once you've done the education and started to play a little bit, going, okay, well, what's our acceptable usage policy around these tools? What are the tools that have been confirmed and approved by the exec team of what to use, and having a bit of consistency, but still having that playing in there. So you sort of need to still encourage the play within, but the policy and tooling is absolutely crucial as well.
And to that point, I was reading statistics the other day. I think 78% of employees are using generative AI for work, and only 30% of those tools are actually being paid for by the company. So what that says is that, and I've got visions of people sticking their USB stick in, downloading their report, taking it home, feeding it into ChatGPT, bringing it back in. And I don't know if you're finding this. I'm finding there's still a little bit of people see it as cheating if you're using generative AI. And so there's this mismatch. I mean, a lot of the work I do is around that culture change that needs to happen, because there's this mismatch between employers or businesses wanting their staff to be empowered by AI, and yet doing it in a way that doesn't fully empower them, that doesn't let them play, that doesn't let them, explore. And the reality is, it's still early days. We're still in the early adopter phase. The majority of businesses are still not even there yet. So it's very early days.
It is, and I think that's why doing the play part is so fundamental, and the education part, because you go, okay, what's not going to change is understanding, like the need to understand it. So that's you're always going to need that part, and the play part. It's pretty fun at the moment to be able to jump on these tools, and a lot of them are free. At least to use. You don't have to be doing some client work that to play with it. You can just use it for other things and going, oh, that's how that thing works. So that when they do mature, that you are ready, right? And I think that being AI ready is actually a big part of it, is going, okay, this is a new way of working. And we need to start to think about those new use cases. But now that when the AI technologies mature and there's more policies around them and more guardrails, all of that, you'll be really ready to take advantage of that.
And it comes back to that point about being agile. A lot of what I talk about, particularly with smaller to medium-sized businesses, I think larger corporates have got different budgets that they can invest into their own, their own custom builds. But smaller organizations or businesses don't necessarily have that ability yet. And I think it's too soon to go all in on one tool or one solution, or invest millions of dollars in a custom build, because we are going to see, and we've already seen it, some of these companies might go bust. Some of them might go all in on one aspect of the technology and find that that's not where it's at. And so I'm really encouraging people to look at that horizontal integration, where every role, every task, every department looking at how they can use this to lift productivity, increase impact, rather than what's our big investment going to be. Because I just think it's too soon to be making those calls, particularly for, unless you're a multinational company that is driven by AI. For a lot of businesses and organizations, it's too early to make that call. So I love that culture of play, and test the different models, and really have a go with non-critical data or non-critical tasks.
We like to think of the octopus as being a nice little motif for this time, because you go lots of arms playing with lots of different tools. Makes light work, right? Many hands makes light work. And I think that it's fun to be able to play with those tools. But yeah, to your point, what you were just saying then, that comes back to that evolution over transformation. And I agree. I think that the tech is moving so quickly that making those big decisions to go, all right, this is the thing we're doing, is probably not the best way to do it. It's better to be training each of your individuals in the company how to use it, because the use cases will emerge over time, and just encouraging that safe play, let's say specifically safe and responsible play.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, now Lee, big question. And I know this is something you're really passionate about, but what do you think the future of work is going to look like in the next, I always laugh saying 5 to 10 years, because I'm not sure we can see 5 to 10 months out at the moment. But when you look at the future of work and what steps organisations should be taking now to prepare for that future, how do you share that with the people that you're working with?
Well, again, I think it depends
What's
on
your vision.
Yeah, it depends on the industry, very much so. So I feel like at the moment, what industry you're in really determines what that future looks like. I would say that when I think about 5 to 10 years, the biggest thing for me is that generative AI fundamentally changes business models. And there's a lot. I think I saw the NVIDIA guy and Jensen Huang talk about this, but how back when we got electricity, that we started to think about things of like kilowatt hours, right? And that the business model was sort of designed around how much you're consuming of energy, of electricity. But if you think about generative AI, it's like a token model, right? So that's how much compute is being used, how much input output is happening with these AIs. So there'll be like a token compute based model, which I think is interesting for companies that might be on a subscription model. And so if their business model is subscriptions, it could be interesting because they're probably pretty excited about generative AI and trying to implement it and putting it into their tools. So if you're a software as a service, you might have a new AI feature. But as people use that AI feature, if it's not based on compute, their compute power that they're using and the energy from that is going to increase the costs significantly of their business model. So if you've just got a flat rate subscription plus these AI tools, it's just probably not going to work, right? And I think
every platform I subscribe to is launching their AI capability within the platform, and
exactly.
Yeah, so it will be interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, so there's shifts. So I think I'm thinking very broadly of being like, well, what are the business models? Because that then, if you're whoever the listener is, can go, okay, well, how might that apply to my business? But the other thing being that, well, what is the future of software in a world where, and I was just looking at a demo the other day where it was UI to code, and that really disrupts front end design, right? And basically this guy has created a tool where you take a screenshot of some interface. I think he actually used ChatGPT as this example, which is a pretty simple interface, admittedly. But then he put it into his little tool and it did the full code. It analyzed everything in the interface and then reproduced it in code. And you go, okay, so what if you apply that to any piece of software? And what if we get, I don't know if this is, if we'll get here, but it might be possible. What if we get to a point where you can describe the features of an app that you might be already using, maybe you already use and paid for a piece of software, but that it's, fairly simple kind of piece, but you'd be able to describe it and the AI would basically be able to code it and create it. And then all of a sudden you don't need to be paying that subscription anymore. What is the future of software if anyone can get there? I don't know if that will end up eventuating. It certainly feels like we're on a trajectory where these AIs are getting smart enough to do coding really, really proficiently.
And it comes back to that hyper-personalization that, maybe we're moving to a world where we just create exactly what we need or want in our life, as opposed to taking what is provided and available off the shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a concept around, I've just started reading about this, but the maker economy, And it's basically where, where we turn into makers rather than consumers, which is quite interesting from an economic perspective, where we're able to make whatever it is that we want. And I think that these things are, they might be a little bit far out, but I think that, if we're thinking 5 to 10 years, I absolutely think that's possible, that we move into this world where you're creating, or the AI is creating, the interface that you need, like a dynamic interface for the task you need at that moment. So I'm not sure what the future of software is in that world. It's very specific there, but so much of our models have been built on that, off the shelf, enterprise software, etc. Perhaps in the future it will be less that. And also I would say, there are, like, we talk about how there'll still be, I'm a big believer that there'll still be jobs for humans to do. Absolutely. I think the jobs that we do will change. And I also suspect that that we will lean down in our organization, so they'll become smaller. That there will be still roles in each area probably, but that there might be less people required. And this is another thing of going, if you're a big software company and you're based on the number of seats you're selling to these enterprises, that reduces as well. So I think that, I know this discussion, it's been very focused on software, but I think that it probably has a big disruption coming for it. And that's why it's an interesting thing to talk about. But yeah, I think so for the future of work, and like what work looks like, is that ability to talk to lots of different AIs, and again, think about the problem that you're trying to solve, and really having that sort of really stepping back. Because what I'm finding is so many of these big tech companies are kind of like, I don't know, throwing spaghetti at the wall at the moment, like what sticks, and they're not actually thinking about the problems they're trying to solve, or whether the individual even wants that feature. It feels like they've forgotten the human-centered design or design thinking process entirely. Like, oh, this is a fun new thing to play with. Let's put this on our tools. And then they're like, why isn't anyone using it? You're like, well, because you haven't done the proper, design thinking process and prototyping of it. But yeah, I think that basically we will end up in a place where we will become problem solvers and thinking about what problems we want to solve, rather than necessarily doing the really functional tasks. I would say that it's probably going to be a bit more abstract, our future work, personally, and also emotional relationship focused as well.
One of the things I've been grappling with at my 3 o'clock in the morning can't sleep AI conversations in my head. Do you think AI is going to make us smarter or dumber?
Well, I think it depends on how you use it. So I think that in so many ways, like social media AI, let's call it the algorithms, have kind of I think somewhat dumbed us down, and we are just consuming content constantly. And there's studies done of the shortening of our attention, and that it's kind of rotting our brains a little bit. But what I think is nice about generative AI, at least how I've been using it, I think it's expanding my mind, like in a really big way, personally. And so sometimes, I don't know if have you played with Pi,
yes, that was one of my first favorites.
It's a good one, right?
I love it. Like conversations.
Yeah, it's such good. There's such a good conversation. It's such a good conversationalist, and I think that's what's interesting. Sorry, I'm going to have a little digression before I come back to that point. But what I think is amazing about Pi is that they've really thought about the design of the tool. So from a personality perspective, how it communicates, and I think that there's going to be a lot of work in that. It's like designing AIs that are going to be good for personality, because everyone's going to like different tools, right? Some people talk to Pi and they're like, I hate it, and I'm like, oh, I love it because I have a chat, and it has like a certain personality. I actually did an article way back. It was a bit of an experiment when all the tools were coming out, and it was a bit of a silly, fun experiment. But I basically asked each of I think it was 5 or 6 tools that I was talking to, and asked it to like identify itself as on a Myers-Briggs, even though obviously that's for humans, and it's also a pretty blunt tool itself. I thought it was just funny to do it, and every single one of them identified differently and then explained why. But I also could see how some of them did have different personality, right? Like the Snapchat AI was so like, I don't know, fun and, sort of effervescent. And whereas like the Bard, which is now Gemini, Google's, was very like straightforward and technical. And you can see that in each of these tools, there's a design behind it. I think that that's exciting for me because I love that sort of that human part of it. But like, how is this going to interface with the individual? And I think that's really interesting. But coming back to the question around whether it'll dumb us down or not, what I'm finding is that I have these really big conversations. I'll go for a walk and I'll talk to Pi about something that I'm interested in or that I've started to like discover, and it will then broaden my perspective on it. And it'll also then, I'll often ask it at the end, be like, are there any thought leaders in this space, or are there any books that I could read to deepen my knowledge? And it just already has it. And they've been right. They've been really good recommendations. And I go, cool, I can go now read about this. So I think if you're using it curiously, it actually should expand your mind. But if you're not, if you're using it as an opportunity of being like, this is a thing that I now can talk to that has a wealth of knowledge, and I can literally just have a chat with it, and you use it that way, then you're going to probably expand your mind. If you're going, hey, this is my job, can you do it for me? Then you're going to have that's the opposite. You're going to close down your mind and stop thinking about how to use things. So I think I think it has the potential. I think both things can be true, Kate. I think that's ultimately
and I think you're right. I think it comes back to intent. It's like, I often say I'm 50% thrilled and exhilarated about the potential of AI, and if we lean into it, can solve some of the world's greatest problems, but can also be used for the complete opposite. I'm 50% terrified at the potential of what could go wrong.
Yes, exactly.
So it all comes back to intent. I was having this conversation in our Facebook community around AI success, and someone was sharing how they're using it for blog writing and how far it's come just in the last little while, in particular about getting really nuanced into the nitty-gritty of some of those topics that she was covering. And someone asked the question, well, what stops me just going and asking the AI for that topic? And what I said about that was, well, you as someone who doesn't know about that topic, just asking for information about it is going to give you a fairly surface level coverage of that. Whereas somebody who has the ability to actually use it as a brainstorming tool, actually use it to expand and extrapolate and, go into more detail, is always going to produce a much better result that is then interesting to the reader or the person who's engaging with that content.
Yeah.
So it's the human in the loop. It's the human plus AI as opposed to just AI.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because there's also that. Have you played with Perplexity? I'm sure you probably.
Perplexity. Yes.
Yeah. And
Google's almost out for me, I have to say.
Yeah, right. And that's the other thing. Business models
Google
change.
Just turned itself on.
It's like not going down without a fight. I think that's another thing when it comes to back to business models is that, okay, if we look at, sorry, I'm going to come back to Perplexity, but if we look at the change over, the third industrial revolution, I think the statistic was something like of the 500, Fortune 500 companies in 1955, that only something like 12 of them, I think it was 12, it might have been a few more, but it was a really significant amount had fallen out of the Fortune 500 or had just not survived. So some companies just don't survive these industrial revolutions, and that is a reality. So business models do change. But coming back to Perplexity, is that with that blog writing, is that they've got those pages now, and it's like, is this the new Wikipedia where people are prompting and building on these pages that AI is then going and doing the research for? And that does change. That will change blogs, and I think that blogs will still exist, but actually it's it's sharing your own personal opinions of things, probably less about the functional stuff, right? And I think that if you're doing a how-to article, perhaps that's going to be less useful in the future. But if you're going, this is my my thoughts and opinions around the trends that are coming down the line, that sort of more creative and critical thinking, I still think that those blogs will exist. Absolutely. I just think that perhaps, functional blog writing and SEO driven is maybe a bit more at risk. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think there'll be a bit of a backlash, and I think we're starting to see this a bit already with some people who are just really anti-AI. That there'll be a bit of a backlash and people really yearning for and seeking that human connection. And so I think you're right that where people share their own perspectives, their own journey, and that comes all back to, what those of us in social media have been talking about for years, which is be authentic, be real, be human, connect. And I think that's going to be true for this next transition. Interestingly, we manage a community on Facebook, which is a global meditation community for one of our clients. And we did a little bit of a test where we got ChatGPT to write a really deep and meaningful, beautiful poem about meditation. And everyone was like, oh, that speaks to my soul. And it was so beautiful and transformative. And then we said, so how would you feel if you knew that that was created by AI? Oh, it's terrible. It's horrible. It's just lost all meaning. And it's like, isn't that interesting? Just that lens of when they thought it was created by a human, how it spoke to them and felt very different than when they found out it was written by AI.
Yeah, and at what point does that shift if you go, I wrote it, but it edited it, or it helped me refine it, right? So it's like where's
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, like where does that start and finish, basically?
Well, it's one of the things I was going to touch on that you were speaking about earlier, which is some of the legal ramifications at the moment. In the US, they're talking about legislation that says that if a product has been predominantly developed by AI, it can't be patented. So what does that mean for companies where their staff are predominantly using AI to generate content, to generate products, to generate ideas, to generate strategy? It's a complete paradigm shift in terms of how we approach ownership and copyright and intellectual property and patents and that whole side of things. I think is up for massive amounts of disruption.
Absolutely, and I think this is a good technology to compare it to is the printing press and how that actually not unlocked, but led to copyright law being established, IP, all of those things. And so technology, we're at another point in time, an inflection point where we have to rethink copyright. We have to rethink what it is, like human authorship, all of this sort of stuff, and what percentage it is. And if you're using it in a certain way, I mean, if you're using, I don't know, Adobe or something, and you've been you've edited down a tool so much that it's, a photo so much, and you've blurred it out and everything. I don't know. If you're using an AI that just generates it immediately, then yeah, sure, it's 100% AI generated. I can understand that. But if you have prompted it and evolved it over time using an AI, then it feels different. So I think that, having those decisions around it, I wonder where it'll land. I mean, I suspect that it'll be the prompter who owns it, but it might not be. Who knows?
It's one of the things I'm most excited about this podcast is that we'll be able to look back in 12 months or 24 months and see which conversations actually evolved and how that worked. But it is, I've said this many times on this podcast, that it feels very much like, for me, 15 years ago, the days of the wild, wild west with social media where anything goes. And over time, the algorithms, the frameworks, the safety guardrails, the legislation finally, helps to shape that. But we're still doing that 15 years on for social media, and we don't have the luxury of 15 years with AI. So it's going to disrupt a lot of the traditional ways that we've done things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Now, Lee, I want to ask you one more question before we start to wrap up, and that's around the ethics and the responsible and safe implementation of AI. I think we all know now that you touched on biases and hallucinations and some of the things that we need to be really conscious of when we're implementing AI. How do you approach that topic with with your clients, with the people that you work with, around how to be really ethical, safe, responsible in their use and implementation of AI?
Yeah, I think that ethics and safety and responsibility, whilst connected, can be different topics, because obviously with responsibility and safety, it's a lot around your client's IP, your own IP, how the security of your system, data leaks, all of that, and those are really important issues at a fundamental level of the business. So they're huge business risks. The ethics is broader, I think, and you go, okay, these systems, there's so many different reasons why they could be unethical. And there's a really good book. I don't know if you've read it, but it's Kate Crawford. She's also Australian, actually. Another Kate. And her book's called Atlas of AI, and it talks a lot about the system of AI and how it's been built. And it really was a really good eye opener for understanding ethics. So I think, first of all, again, education. So if you, the more you learn about it, the more you go, okay, this is actually pretty big in terms of a space. But also, I suppose, the ethics of a lot of the ethics is such a hard topic to grasp, actually, to grapple with, let's say. But the reality is that that it can come from a sustainability perspective. So AI does use more energy, it does use more water, all of these things. I think it's something like one ChatGPT prompt on average is about 30 times.
One bottle of water.
Yeah, and 30 times more than a Google search, all of this. So you go, okay, well, will in the future, I think one of the things in the future for organizations is how efficient is your use of AI. So it's like, okay, if you can use it, sure, but know that it's probably going to be using a lot of energy. All of our devices are, though, streaming services, etc. All good. I think we've all kind of, because it's put in this cloud, right? And you don't think about it, but actually the cloud has a huge footprint. I think it's like a marketing. They've done a very good job of branding the cloud. But with AI, I think that it'll come down to how efficient your use of it is. If you're just using it to generate thousands and thousands and thousands of images and useless content, it'll become a lot like the internet landfill, and it'll be the AI landfill, where you're just using all of this for what's your, coming back to intention, right? What's the intention of doing it? And how efficient are you doing that? So this is also similar to like the energy space, right? Our products over time, our fridges have changed so that they are more efficient. A fridge in the 50s looks very different to a fridge now. So there's the ethics of, like, I guess, sustainability. And I think that's really an interesting space to think about, is like, how efficient are your uses of AI if you're implementing them? And then there's the thing, to your point, bias training, understanding that if you're creating something, and you might have a good comment on this because of the personalization, but if you're personalizing content, there are a lot of concerns around how AI might generate content for an individual. And, there's a great book called Technically Wrong, and it basically goes into all of these use cases or examples of when AI algorithms go rogue and, create a really bad experience for their user. And some really extreme ones as well, just around, it's sort of like when Facebook had their, remember this beautiful day, whatever, 10 years ago, and it generates a happy song with, lots of different photos. And I remember reading one where it was like generating a story of a day where this person had a terrible accident and it had this jolly song behind it. So there's this sort of like, again, this comes back to the design of it and the ethics around that, and being like, well, what are you designing for? And I think that I think I've got a chainsaw. It comes back down to how we are going to think about the different parts of the ethics. So it's not a simple conversation, basically.
Sounds like we need a part 2 for that conversation. We just at the end start to delve into all the big topics.
Yes.
So, Lee, just before we wrap up and I ask you to sort of look out at what your predictions are for the next 12 to 24 months, I love to ask, what's your favorite AI tool and why? Do you have
I
a
would say
favorite?
I don't. I feel like I don't have a favorite yet. But the three I probably use most are Perplexity, ChatGPT. I do like Anthropic's Claude as well. For just the reason that they actually, from an ethics perspective, I know that we just passed that, but they are trying to think about how they're designing their systems a little bit more ethically, I think, than other large language frontier models. So, interesting to research that if you are interested in that side of ethics. But yeah, I do use ChatGPT and Perplexity a lot, and then I probably use Pi fairly frequently as a third there. Perplexity is awesome for research. It's similar to you, I've been using it more frequently than, or not more frequently, probably I still use Google, absolutely. It depends what you're searching for, I think. But Perplexity really helps cut down that time for research very quickly.
Hmm. I'm actually finding ChatGPT, as much as in their last product announcement, they didn't talk about real-time search, which everyone predicted that they sort of would. I'm actually finding there's a lot more referencing within ChatGPT. There's a lot more real-time data. Like, it can tell you who's at the top of the footy ladder, and it couldn't do that if it wasn't doing real-time search. So it's certainly interesting to see how some of these platforms evolve things behind the scenes without maybe making announcements, when they're testing them.
Absolutely. And it does, again, it makes you go, well, what are the future tools that'll survive? Because if ChatGPT can, I guess, replicate what Perplexity does, Perplexity's point of difference then becomes the fact that you can choose which model, perhaps, so that it has some differences. But I think that, OpenAI and Apple's recent their recent deal gives that exposure to OpenAI on such a huge level. Like I can't see how, that from a strategic perspective that's going to be really interesting for OpenAI, because they just all of a sudden have like 1 billion people using it or whatever.
Well, we're going to move from early adopter to mainstream very, very quickly.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, because if you look at the hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycles, the interesting thing about the generative AI, all of that, is that yes, it might be at the top of the peak of like whatever the highest point, but the color of the dot, it basically implies that we're going to move through the cycle very quickly. So it's like, yes, we'll go through the trust of disillusionment, but we'll actually come up pretty quickly out of that as well, because this stuff just moves so quickly. And that adoption curve, I mean, I cannot believe that we are where we are just a mere year and a half after, right?
No, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And that's what makes it different than any other technological innovation, I think, that we've seen in the past, is just the speed at which it's evolving. So, Lee, I feel like we could talk for days about this topic and all of the things that we've touched on. But as we wrap up, when you stand on the hill and look out to the horizon, what do you see coming, or what are you most looking forward to coming down the line with AI?
What I'm probably most looking forward to is how it might change accessibility, and I think that's really, really amazing. So when I talk about that, I'm going, okay, well, if you are visually impaired, that you will soon have a thing that perhaps, who knows how the camera will be integrated. Maybe it'll actually be in our AirPods or something, but all of a sudden it'll be able to stream live time everything that you're seeing. So if you're visually impaired, you're going to be able to see through hearing through an AI. And I love that there's so many applications there. I think in science and health, we're going to see huge improvements, that the healthcare will be more accessible globally, education as well. And so I think that it reduces a lot of barriers, and I love that. I think that that's the best part about AI, is that it has the potential to really unlock opportunities for lots of individuals. But also, we need to do it properly. So there's that part of it as well.
Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride, I think.
It really is. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lee. We will share all of your links in the show notes, but where's the one easiest place for people to find you if they'd like to connect?
Oh, yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn, but also futurefornow.world. his website. So there's some
Wonderful.
resources on there.
Thank you so much, Lee, for your time today.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you for tuning in to the AI Grapple. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We would love to hear your thoughts, so reach out with any questions or comments about the show. Until next time, keep grappling with AI and stay curious.